Well, thank you for showing up today, and anybody who's watching on television. I was thinking, since it's coming up on July 4th, I was thinking about American voices, obviously, and I was thinking about some of the famous speeches that we're all familiar with, like 7 years ago, and I Have a Dream, and Ask Not What Your Country Can Do for You. But I thought, men have always had a platform to make speeches. But of course, women who were there, who were very much interested in political things going on around them, have not had that platform, but women wrote letters. And I've come across this wonderful book that I got recently called Women's Letters from 1776 till the present. And I thought I'd read some letters from women at key moments in American history. And it occurs to me as I'm reading through these letters that there is a strand that runs all the way through them. They're very personal. They're very emotional in some ways, but they're also very coolly practical about what needs to be done. And it occurs to me, though of course I'm probably a little biased, that if the men who these women had been writing to had listened to them at the time, things would probably be better now. And when you hear some of these letters, you might have some of those same thoughts. But this first one I'm going to read is probably, if you've heard any of these letters, this may be the one. This is a fairly famous one. This was a letter written from Abigail Adams to her husband, John. He was down with the Continental Congress, and she had been left back in Braintree, Massachusetts, to take care of the family and the family business. And so she's writing him. Now, I'm going to skip one section in the middle where she's detailing everything that's happening to the business and the kids, and just where she's talking about the politics. Read that. This is from March 31st, 1776, and he's off in Virginia at the Congress. I wish you would ever write me a letter half so long as I write you, and tell me, if you may, where the fleet has gone, what sort of defense Virginia can make against our common enemy, whether it is so situated as to make an able defense. Are not the gentry lords and the common people vassals? Are they not like the uncivilized natives Britain represents us to be? I hope their riflemen have shown themselves very savage and even bloodthirsty, but are they not a specimen of the generality of the people there? Doesn't think much of Virginia. I have sometimes been ready to think that the passion for liberty cannot be equally strong in the breasts of those who have been accustomed to deprive their fellow creatures of theirs. Of this I am certain, that it is not founded upon that generous and Christian principle of doing unto others as we would that others should do unto us. Then she skips and she's talking about the fact that Boston has just been freed up from British occupation. Though we felicitate ourselves, we sympathize with those who are trembling lest the lot of Boston should be theirs. But they cannot be in similar circumstances unless cowardice should take possession of them. They have the time and the warning given to them to shun evil. I long to hear that you and your fellows had declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire that you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by laws which we have no voice in or representation of. That your sex are naturally tyrannical is a truth, so thoroughly established as to admit of no dispute, but such of you as wish to be happy will willingly give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend. Why then not put it out of the power of the vicious and the lawless to use us with cruelty and indignity with impunity? Men of sense in all ages abhor those customs which treat us only as the vassals of your sex. Regard us then as beings placed by Providence under your protection and in imitation of the Supreme Being. Make use of that power only for our happiness. I regret to say he answered her fairly flippantly, rather than taking her seriously. In fact, his answer is kind of funny when you think about it in a cruel way. He said, well, if we give freedom to women, pretty soon we're going to be having to give it to Indians and black people. You know how it is. You give rights to one group, and pretty soon everybody wants them. All right. Here's a letter from Mary Custis Lee. Now, she was the wife of Robert E. Lee. She was the granddaughter of General Washington. And in this point, she is writing to her friend Elizabeth Stiles, who is a woman who lives in Georgia. And of course, this is February 9th, 1861. So we have had the rebellion against Fort Sumter in South Carolina, but general war has not been declared against the southern states or by the southern states. And so she's writing to her friend about the situation. I only this evening, my dear friend, received your letter written on the 5th of January. Where could it have been all this time? Not intercepted, I hope, by the secessionists. You directed it to Alexandria, whereas we have changed our post office now to Arlington, near Washington, D.C. I am so much obliged to you for thinking of me in these troubled times, though I have thought much of you and yours, for a few days since had determined to write to you to know if you could approve of all these riotous proceedings. Has all love and pride in their country died in the South? That they are willing to tear her in pieces and even some to exult to see her glorious flag trailing in the dust. It should rather have drawn tears from their eyes. We have lived and fought and prospered under this flag for so many years, and though the South has suffered much from the meddling of Northern fanatics, yet do they expect to fare better now? Are there no rights and privileges more important than those of Negro slavery? The Tribune and New York Times have published the most villainous attacks upon my husband by name and upon my father's memory in language I would not pollute my lips by repeating. And yet, after all these wrongs, I would lay down my life if I could save our Union. What is the use of a government combined, as ours is, of so many parts, the union of which forms its strength and power, if any one part has the right for any wrong, real or imaginary, of withdrawing its aid and throwing the whole into confusion, as South Carolina, who refuses all overtures for peace and imagines the world will admire her independence, whereas they laugh at her folly, which is perfectly suicidal. You know my feelings are all linked with the South, and you will bear with me in the expression of my opinion that while there are many of the Northern politicians who deserve no better fate than to be hung as high as Haman, believe me that those who have been foremost in this revolution will deserve and meet with the reprobation of the world, either North or South, for having destroyed the most glorious union that ever existed. You have lived abroad, you have known many excellent people in the North, and all your sympathies and feelings cannot be confined to your state, to the exclusion of your country. The Almighty may intend to punish us for our national pride. I pray now that He will preserve us from civil war. We can never boast again as a nation unless all could be restored. Believe me, my dear friend, whatever may happen, you and yours will always be dear to my heart, and at least our love and our association will be unbroken. I only wish the other southern states had left South Carolina alone and the government had let her alone, and she would now have been tired of her fake sovereignty. She has been restless and anxious to show her independence for many years, and it would have been as well for her to try the experiment alone. Mr. Lee is in Texas now and is grieved at the state of things. It would have been an interesting experiment to just leave South Carolina alone and let them try to be their own country and see what happened. All right, skipping ahead now to 1902. This is a letter from Susan B. Anthony to Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Now, you may not have realized they actually lived on over into the 20th century, but at this point when when Anthony is writing to Stanton, they had been working for 50 years, first on abolition of slavery and then on women's rights, of course. And at this point, they're both quite elderly, and she's writing to her on the occasion of her birthday. They first started working together in 1851. My dear Mrs. Stanton, I shall indeed be happy to spend with you November 12th, the day on which you round out your 77, over 4 years ahead of me. But in age, as in all else, I follow you closely. It is 51 years since we first met, and we have been busy through every one of them, stirring up the world to recognize the rights of women. The older we grow, the more keenly we feel the humiliation of disenfranchisement, and the more vividly we realize its disadvantages in every department of life, and most of all in the labor market. We little dreamed when we began this contest, optimistic with the hope and buoyancy of youth, that half a century of later we would be compelled to leave the finish of the battle to yet another generation of women. But our hearts are filled with joy to know that they enter upon this task equipped with a college education, with business experience, with the fully admitted right to speak in public, all of which were denied to women 50 years ago. They have practically but one point to gain: suffrage. We had all. These strong, courageous, capable young women will take our place and complete our work. There is an army of them where we were but a handful. Ancient prejudice has become softened, public sentiment liberalized, and women have so thoroughly demonstrated their ability as to leave not a shadow of doubt that they will carry our cause to victory. And we, dear old friends, shall move on to the next sphere of existence, higher and larger we cannot fail to believe, and one where women will not be placed in an inferior position, but will be welcomed on a plane of perfect intellectual and spiritual equality. Ever yours, Susan B. Anthony. Yeah. Okay, I'm continuing our march through history here. Now I was reading this one and I thought, you know, the more things change, you know, the way it goes, the more they say the same. This is a letter from 1914, October 28th, 1914, from Margaret Sanger. Now, I don't know if you know who Margaret Sanger was. She was a nurse and a public health worker. She was a good friend of Emma Goldman. They were radicals together. She published a journal called the American Woman. And what she primarily was trying to do, because she worked in the slums and she saw what poverty did to people, was trying to get information on birth control and contraception out to the public. I mean, and so she wrote it up in this journal. Ultimately, her organization became Planned Parenthood, but that was years down the road. But every time she would put something out, it would be confiscated or burned, and she'd be thrown in jail or whatever, and her writings were considered pornographic. So at this point, several issues of her magazine have been confiscated, and she's writing to her subscribers. This is October 28th, 1914. Comrades and friends, every paper published should have a message for its readers. It should be delivered and be done. The Women Rebel had for its aim the imparting of information of the prevention of conception. It was not the intention to labor on for years advocating the idea, but simply to give the information directly to those who needed it. The March, May, July, August, September, and October issues have been suppressed and confiscated by the post office, though they have been mailed regularly to all subscribers. If you have not received your copy, it has been because the U.S. Post Office has refused to bring them to you. My work in the nursing field for the past 14 years has convinced me that the workers desire the knowledge of the prevention of conception. My work among women of the working class proved to me sufficiently that it is they who are suffering because of the law which forbids the imparting of this information. To wait for this law to be repealed would be years and years hence. Thousands of unwanted children may be born into the world in the meantime. Thousands of women will be made miserable and unhappy. Why should we wait? Shall we who have heard the cries and seen the agony of dying women respect the law which has caused their death? Shall we watch in patience the murdering of 25,000 women who die each year in the U.S. from criminal abortions? Shall we fold our hands and wait until a body of sleek and well-fed politicians get ready to abolish the cause of such slaughter? Shall we look upon a piece of parchment as greater than human happiness and greater than human life? Shall we let it destroy our womanhood and hold millions of workers in bondage and slavery? Shall we respond to the throbbing pulse of human needs, concern ourselves with indictments, courts, and judges, or shall we do our work first and settle with those later? This law has caused the perpetuation of quackery. It has created the false quack who benefits by its existence. Jail has never been my goal. There is special work to be done, and I shall do it first. If jail comes after, I shall call upon all to assist me. In the meantime, I shall attempt to nullify the law by direct action and attend to the consequences later. Over 100,000 working men and women in the U.S. hear from me. The Boston Tea Party was a defiant and revolutionary act in the eyes of the English government, but to the American revolutionists, it was but an act of courage and freedom and justice. Yours fraternally, Margaret Sanger. Okay, this is, I'm moving through history here, up to 1941. Now, this is a young woman named Monica Conter. Nobody's really ever heard of Monica Conter. She was a U.S. Army nurse. She happened to be stationed in Honolulu at a hospital at Hickam Field in December of 1941. And of course, she's writing to her parents to reassure them that she is still alive. This is December 22nd. This is 2 weeks after the Pearl Harbor attack, and she is trying to tell her parents what went on. Dearest Daddy and Mother, I understand we may write anything that has been published already in the local papers concerning the raid, and as I know you are curious to know my part in the show, I will try to give you an account. Sunday a.m., December the 7th. I rushed on duty late. I had overslept as we had quite a party the night before at the Pearl Harbor Officers Club. While drinking coffee and tomato juice, I heard some planes real low. One sounded like it might crash on the hospital. Just as I jumped up from my desk, I heard a terrible noise. I said, "A plane has crashed," and ran out onto the screen porch, 3rd floor, overlooking Pearl Harbor. That's when it really started. What I saw was a lot of black smoke and planes so low they looked as if they might be landing in the harbor. Having lived on the air post, I have learned to identify our different types of planes, and I know we didn't have anything with big red circles on the sides. I turned to some of the patients who know aircraft, and one other nurse, Miss Boyd, who knew aircraft, said, "My God, it's the Japs." They laughed and said, "Don't be silly, it's just maneuvers." I was hitting Sergeant Holliday on the shoulder, trying to make him confirm my statement, and he laughed too. So I ran downstairs to the commanding officer, Captain Lane, and asked him if it was the real McCoy, the Japs. All he could do was shake his head in the affirmative and start making phone calls. Then I got all my patients downstairs to the 1st floor, and we all stayed there. I mean, all the medical personnel working. Really, I never heard so much noise in my life. Bombs, some seemed 500 pounds, machine guns, our anti-aircraft, and in the middle of it all, some of our planes were just coming in from the mainland without radio or ammunition or guns. Naturally, a few were downed. The wounded started coming in 10 minutes after the first attack. We called Tripler for more ambulances. They wanted to know if we were having maneuvers. Well, the side of our hospital I will never forget. People with no arms, no legs, intestines hanging out. In the meantime, the hangars all around us were burning, and still that awful noise. Then came the second attack. We all fell face down over the wounded in the halls, OR, and everywhere, and heard the bombers directly over us. We, the nurses and the doctors, had no helmets nor gas masks, and it really was a helpless feeling. In the meantime, the bombs were dropping all around us, and when a 500-pound bomb dropped about near the hospital, we waited for the plane to come in as it felt like it had hit us, and then they were gone. All our electric clocks had stopped on the dot. The dead were placed in the back of the hospital, the walking wounded went into trucks to Tripler, and the seriously injured in the ambulances. We used our place as an evacuation hospital. The mayor sent out 20 cases of whiskey, so that helped some. That is, the uninjured who were going around in a daze. Of course, it was used medicinally, too. We worked and worked and worked, and when night came on, blackout. For a week, the nurses slept in uniform on the ward in one of the officers' rooms. Then we were moved downstairs to the X-ray dark room. You know, I have always loved activity and excitement. For once, though, I had had enough. And a happy New Year to all of you at home. Your loving daughter, Monica. Well. So, you know, obviously the women were present in all of these events, and this is what I'm going to tell you now. We're skipping up to 1952, was another event that was very sort of an important milestone in America's thinking about itself, and of course women were involved. This was from May 19th, 1952. This is Lillian Hillman writing to John Wood. She had been summoned because some of her plays were considered left-wing and subversive, Lillian Hillman, the playwright, and she was writing to the secretary, John Wood. He was chairman of the House Un-American Activities Committee, and so she got called up. Dear Mr. Wood, as you know, I am under a subpoena to appear before your committee on May 21st. I am most willing to answer all the questions about myself. I have nothing to hide from your committee, and there is nothing in my life of which I am ashamed. I have been advised by counsel that under the Fifth Amendment, I have a constitutional privilege to decline to answer any questions about my political opinions, activities, and associations on the ground of self-incrimination. I do not wish to claim this privilege. I am ready and willing to testify before the representatives of our government as to my own opinions and my own actions, regardless of any risks or consequences to myself. But I am advised by counsel that if I answer the committee's questions about anything, I must also answer questions about other people, and that if I refuse to do so, I can be cited for contempt. My counsel tells me that if I answer questions about myself, I will have waived my rights under the Fifth Amendment and could be forced legally to answer questions about others. This is very difficult for a layman to understand. But there is one principle that I do understand. I am not willing, now or in the future, to bring trouble to people who, in my past association with them, were completely innocent of any talk or any action that was disloyal or subversive. I do not like subversion or disloyalty in any form, and if I had ever seen any, I would have considered it my duty to have reported it to the proper authorities. But to hurt innocent people whom I knew many years ago in order to save myself is, to me, inhuman and indecent and dishonorable. I cannot and will not cut my conscience to fit this year's fashions, even though I long ago came to the conclusion that I was not a political person and couldn't have no comfortable place in any political group. I was raised in an old-fashioned American tradition, and there were certain homely things that were taught to me: to try to tell the truth, to not bear false witness, to not harm my neighbor, to be loyal to my country, and so on. I have respected these ideals of Christian honor and did as well with them as I knew how. It is my belief that you will agree with these simple rules of human decency and will not expect me to violate the good American tradition from which they sprang. I would therefore like to come before you and speak only of myself. I am prepared to waive the privilege against self-incrimination and to tell you anything you wish to know about my views or actions if your committee will agree to refrain from asking me to name other people. If the committee is unwilling to give me this assurance, I will be forced to plead the privilege of the Fifth Amendment at the hearing. A reply to this letter would be appreciated. Sincerely yours, Lillian Hillman. Of course, they ignored her, and she ended up having to take the Fifth Amendment because she refused to testify about other people. Let's see. Okay, 1963. This is December 1st, 1963, and this is Jacqueline Kennedy writing to Nikita Khrushchev. This is a little over a week since her husband was shot in Dallas, and this is, all of us, I'm sure, of our age certainly remember where we were when we saw that picture of her standing there in her pink suit with the blood all over it. But anyway, so this is a week after the funeral, and she's sending out a letter to Nikita Khrushchev. Dear Mr. Chairman President Khrushchev, I would like to thank you for sending Mr. Mikoyan as your representative to my husband's funeral. He looked so upset when he approached me, and I was touched by this. I tried that day to tell you some things through him, but it was such a horrible day for me that I do not know if my words were received as I wanted them to be. Therefore, now, on one of the last nights I will spend in the White House, and one of the last letters I will write on this White House stationery, I would like to write my message to you. I am sending it only because I know how much my husband was concerned about peace, and how important the relations between you and him were in this concern. He often cited your words in his speeches, quote, "In the next war, the survivors will envy the dead." You and he were adversaries, but you were also allies in your determination not to let the world be blown up. You respected each other and could have dealings with each other. I know that President Johnson will make every effort to establish the same relationship. The danger troubling my husband was that war could be started not so much by major figures as by minor ones. Whereas major figures understand the need for self-control and restraint, minor ones are sometimes moved rather by fear and pride. If only in the future major figures could still force the minor ones to sit down at the negotiating table before they begin to fight. I know that President Johnson will continue the policy my husband believed in so deeply, the policy of self-control and restraint, and he will need your help. I am sending you this letter because I am so deeply mindful of the importance of the relations that existed between you and my husband, and also because you and Mrs. Khrushchev were so kind to us in Vienna. I read that she had tears in her eyes as she was coming out of the American Embassy in Moscow after signing the condolences book. Please tell her thank you for this. Sincerely, Jacqueline Kennedy. And then finishing up with two short ones. This one is from 2001, sometime around September 12th. So that would be the day after 9/11. This is written addressed to a police officer, to the police officer who helped me on September the 11th. And it was just sent to the police headquarters. To the police officer who helped me on September 11th, you literally picked me up off the sidewalk that day. I was on the east side of City Hall Park, and after the second World Trade Center collapse, I was running from the wall of dust and flying debris when I fell. I was terrified. People were running over me and past me. You lifted me off the ground and said, "Run with me." After a few blocks, when I said I didn't think I could run anymore, you said, "Run just a little further, and then if you can't run, I will carry you." You got me to a safe place and went back to help others. I didn't get your badge number or your name, but I will never forget you. I pray that you are safe. You and your brother and sister officers are one of the great things about this city. With love and gratitude, Anne, the lady in the gray dress and yellow sweater. And then finishing up on what the only 4th of July thing I could really find, and I think you'll like this one. This is a letter, it's from 1986, so we're backing up a few years. July 13th, 1986. It's from a little girl named Rachel Silverman to her parents, Jane and Ira Silverman. Rachel had been sent off to summer camp, as many children have always been, and she's writing to her parents about this. She's 12, by the way. Dearest Mater and Pater, hola, howdy, hi. The weather at camp has been awful. Freezing rain, freezing air and water, which we have to swim a quarter-mile triangle in, and nonstop rain. Mr. Sunshine is sleeping on the job. Please note, this is Treetops Camp stationery. Please send me more stationery, a sleeping bag, my black sweatshirt, and addresses. A square dance was yesterday, and it was fun. The second years, I'm one, hosted it, and our theme was tropical fever. We're probably going to have 3 more. Camp has gotten better, but next week, Wednesday, our tent has to go on a camp out with 4 nerds. I dread it, mainly because they want to play Truth or Dare with kissing, Black. She actually read out Black. I'm sure that I'll refuse to play. Yesterday, we got our showers, which we haven't had in 8 days, and our laundry. They lost my sweatshirt. Also, my ears are infected, and I have to take medication. They hurt a lot. Thanks a lot for sending me pictures and the pen. I wish I was there to enjoy the 4th of July with you. We did absolutely nothing fun for the 4th of July. Love, Rachel. P.S. Right back. P.P.S. The weather is making me in a pathetic mood. P.P.P.S. The goat had kids. PPPPS, Mom, please catch me up on the comics. You still haven't, and I'm dying to know. Do you remember that song, that hello mom, mother, hello father, here I am at Camp Granada? Yep, this is the poor little Rachel, there she is. They're going to send her out to play Truth and Dare with kissing, and she can't do it. Anyway, this is a marvelous book, and I didn't read any of the really great letters, just some of the few, what can I say? So women have always had a voice, they just haven't always had a platform. There you go.